Now we're on the top of Mem Hayam base, and we're deriving the conclusion Allah according to the Chachamim that the Ivarim P'dam Shalom is Aklu Mi Esmol will be burnt on a Marocha Gedola. Shesodron, how do we know that we place them al gabe mizbeach? So that what they do is, as Rabbeinu Chanal explains over here, they put it on the side of the mizbeach in order that they can organize on the Rosh HaMizbeach the Marocha Gedola. So they put it on the side of the mizbeach. V'im ein machzikon, if let's say there's not enough room on the side of the mizbeach to hold on to the Ivarim P'darim, is then sojourn ala kevish. They even will organize them overnight on the kevish itself, on the ramp, on the side of the mizbeach. Oh, alternatively, al gabi sovev, right? The sovev was that area on the top half of the mizbeach, which surrounded the mizbeach, that had a width of 1 amma, so that the mizbeach itself was 10 amos high, and on the bottom there was an extra amma that jutted out, which is called the Yisod. And then when you enter into the Mizbeach, that Amma, and you climb up 5 Amos, then you get to the Mizbeach, another Amma, which is called the Sovev. And from there to the head of the top of the Mizbeach is another 3 Amos. Then there's going to be an Amma of the Gova, the height of the Chronos, totaling 10 Amos, the height of the Mizbeach. And the Kohanim used to walk around the Mizbeach by standing on the Sovev and following it around the Mizbeach. And that's how they put the dam that had to be on the top half of the Mizbeach, on the Kronos HaMizbeach. And even though the Laila, the whole night is passed on these Eivarim P'tarim, there's no Psulina, because since they're on the Chatzi HaMizbeach Lamala, the top half of the Mizbeach has the status of a mizbeach, and ein lina poseles b'rosh hamizbeach. If, on the other hand, they would place the evarim p'darim shalom nisaklu on the yisoda mizbeach, on the bottom base of the mizbeach, then it would become posel b'lina. There's a kasha of the Gvuras Ari. We'll mention it in passing that in Masechet Zvachim on Daf Pei Zayin, the Gemara records machlokas amoraim, where the lina poselis b'rosh hamizbeach. How would we reconcile our sugya with actually the sheet of Rava in Zvachim, who pasels rosh hamizbeach? And that's the kasha here of the Gvuras Ari Ayin Sham. Now, they placed and left these Evarim and Chalavim, Shalonis Aklu, of Esmol, on the side of the Mizbeach or on the Kevesh, Ad Sheyasa Marocha Gedola, until they burnt the Marocha Gedola, the Sodron, and then they would take the Evarim, the Chalavim of yesterday, and they put them on the Marocha Gedola. How do we learn this? From whence do we derive this conclusion? Talmud Lomar, again, this is the sheet of the Chachamim, and it says in Vayikra Perik Vav again, but in a different pasuk, this pasuk Gimel, Ve'irimis Hadeshen Asher Tochala H Esholal HaMizbeach. And this pasuk is talking about Trumas Hadeshen, that we have to do our Rama to remove the Deshen, the leftover ashes of the Evarim, the various limbs of the Ola that were burnt on the fire. But since it adds these words Al HaMizbeach, which are totally redundant, right? It could have said Ve'herim Es Hadeshen Asher Tochal Ha'eshes Ha'ola V'Somo Eitz Al HaMizbeach. Why does it add Al HaMizbeach? And this is the Evrei Ha'ola that we burn on the Mizbeach. And in the previous pasuk it says Zotz Torah Ha'ola Hi Ha'ola Al Mokdah Al HaMizbeach Al Laila Ada Boker. So we see that during the entire course of the night, we're maktir Evarim V'Chalavim on the Maroch Mizbeach. So what does this Al HaMizbeach come to teach me? And the answer is that there's an extra nesina of the Evarim HaKarbonos on the Maroch Mizbeach. And that refers to those Evarim and Pidarim Shalonis Aklu Ada Boker. For Rabbi Meir, who holds that a Varim Chalovim of yesterday require a separate Marocha, a new designated independent pyre, and they would not put it back on the Marocha Gedolah. So now let's ask a question. What is the Pasuk Es Ha'olah Al HaMizbeach? And we pointed out that the words Al HaMizbeach are redundant. What is coming to teach us? And the Gemara answers that according to Rabbi Meir, this Pasuk is coming to teach us the din that if you have a Varim P'tarim Shepaku, which means they fell off the Mizbeach, what's the din as far as putting them back on the Mizbeach? And the answer is Ikule Ola Atomachsir. The Atomachsir Ikule Torres. Torah is now differentiating between the Ola itself and the Ktoris. With regard to the Ola itself, the Avarim, the limbs of the Ola, if they fell off the Mizbeach, we're talking about, again, the Mizbeach HaChitzon, and they haven't yet been totally consumed, we have to put them back onto the Marocha, so that the process of equal of the burning of the Avarim should come to its completion, and the Avarim should be completely consumed. But with regard to the Ktores, if the Ktores was Paka, it comes off the Mizbeach, and we're talking now the Mizbeach HaPnimi, you don't put them back onto the Mizbeach. Rather, you gather them together, you put them in Geniza, in a place where no one will step on them because they're Ketochin. And the Gemara brings a proof from the following Brisa that this is the drasha. Tani Rab Chananya Bar Yomi B'debei in the base medrash of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The pasuk says again in Vayikra Vav pasuk Gimel, Asher tukad, Asher tochala eish es ha'olah, which is Trumas Hadesh, but it says Ala Mizbeach, and the Ala Mizbeach is superfluous, to teach me that Ikule Ola Tamachser V'yat Tamachser Ikule K'toros. So the Gemara now makes the following observation. The Kuli Alma Bios, everybody, all the Tanoim unanimously agree that most Sifim Bo Bayom Islu, they all agree and accept the principle that whatever the various shittas are respectively about how many marochas there are during the entire course of the year, but on Yom Kippur we add an extra marocha. Minolahu, what's the source from which we derive the extra marocha of Yom Kippurim? Nafkalahu, we derive it, and this is a surprise because we're going back to the regular dinim of marocha in Vayikra Perek Vav. I would have anticipated that this halacha would have been recorded in the Torah in Parshas Achrimos in Sefer Vayikra, later on in Sefer Vayikra. However, we're going to derive it from the extra words in the pasuk V'ha'esh. Notice there are two extra letters here. Before we talked about the extra vav, but in this pasuk there's the vav and the hey. V'ha'esh alam mizbeach tukad bo, and that's going to teach me that we need an extra marah. V'afilu l'mandelo dorish vav, but vav v'hei dorish. So even though we mentioned before the Chachamim, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi reject a drush of the extra word vav, but here we have a vav and a hey, and we're going to darshan it. And even though this pasuk again is not referring to Yom Kippurim, but nevertheless, since we have two extra letters to teach me that there's an extra maracha, we're going to interpret it as a reference and allusion to Yom HaKippur. Now, once the Gemara has clarified that the various marachas are derived from the various psukim according to the Tanoim, and we darshan, all the different times that it says the word tukad and moked to set up this maracha and that maracha. Now the Gemara wants to know, what do we do with the word moked in another pasuk? Again, in Vayikra Vav, but now we're looking at pasuk Vav, and it says there, Eish tamid tukad al mizbech lo sichta. Again, we have another moked here, tukad al mizbech. Lamai also, what is this coming to? Maybe we've covered all the different marachos and derived all 5 of them. Look at Sanya. And now we have a brisa that's darshaning, first and foremost, in the same perek, Vav, Pasuk Beis, the Eish HaMizbeach Tukad Bo, Limed al Marocha Shniya Shel Ketoret Shel Tehei, Ela al HaMizbeach HaChitzon. We had a drasha back on Mem Heyam and Aleph to derive a separate maracha for producing the coals that they used on a daily basis for the Ketores, which would be burnt in the Mizbeach HaPnimi in the Heichal twice a day. But the exact location of the Gecholim from which they would take and set up the Haktoris Lifnim in the Heichal, how do we know that these gecholim are taken from the Mizbach HaOlah, from the Mizbeach HaChitzon? And the answer is because it says Tukad Bo. The whole parsha is talking about the Mizbach HaOlah, the Mizbach HaChitzon, and it says Tukad Bo. And Va'esh ala Mizbeach HaMizbeach Tukad Bo. Eish means gecholim, and for what purpose? For the machta. And now we're going to talk about the machta of Yoma Kippurim, which was used to set up and bring the gecholim into Lifnai v'Lifnei the Kodesh Kadoshim. They would be taken, these gecholim, from the Mizbeach HaChitzon. Not only that, but the Eish on the Mizbeach HaChitzon was also the source of the fire for Adlokas HaMenorah on a daily basis. Minayin, how do we see this? How do we know that dafka from the Mizbeach HaChitzon, the Eish should be taken for the purpose of Aktorah Lifnai v'Lifnim on Yom Kippurim and the purpose of Adlokas HaMenorah? Why take it? Why take the H from the Mizbach HaChitzoni and not from the Mizbach HaPnimi, Mizbeach HaPnimi? And Vidinu. And in fact, there is a Bamematzinu compelling logic, because Nemra Eish B'Ktores, with regard to the Eish from which they took the fire to burn the Ketores inside the Heichal in the Mizbeach HaPnimi on a daily basis. The Torah says in Shmos, Perek Lamed Pasuk Zayin, Viktir Olav Aron Ketores Samim Baboker Beitivoes Haneros Yaktirenu. So we have the word Aktorah, and Aktorah always means by definition with an H, and it mentions the Neros. So that's the H in the Ketores, because the Pasuk says Vehiktir Ketores Hasamin. Benemra H B'Machta, with regard to the Machta of the Ketores of Yom Kippurim, it says in Achrimos V'Lakach Meloa Machta Gachle Eish Me'al Mizbeach L'fnei Hashem. So we have the Melo Chafnav of the Ketores Hasamim Daka, which he has to bring Beis HaParoches, and Menorah in Shmos Perek of Zayin, it says Lalos Ner Tamid. Malahalan, just like in the case of the Eish HaKetores, the Mokom HaGecholim from which we take the Gecholim, the fire is Al Mizbeach HaChitzon, is here to Afkan with regard to the Eish and the Macht of Yom Kippurim, or the Eish of the Adlokas HaMenorah, we take it Al Me'al Gabe HaMizbeach HaChitzon. And now the Brisa is going to try to explain the logic that would compel us to come to the exact opposite conclusion. Oklach l'derech acheres, perhaps you want to take a different approach and say the following: Nemar Eish b'Ketores, on the daily Ketores it says Eish, v'nemar Eish b'Machta with regard to Yom Kippurim, and u'b'Menorah is then, why don't we say the following? Instead of identifying both as the same exact location, let's do it more conceptually, which means that Malal and B'Samachlo, Af Machto Menorah B'Samachlo. We have the Ketores on a daily basis And the Mokum HaGecholim is going to be B'samachlo, which means that we're going to be maktir the Ketores on the Mizbeach HaPnimi. And where we're going to take the Gecholim from, we're going to take it from the Mizbeach HaChitzon, because that's called Samach Lehecha. And there's no place that would be mafsik between the H of the Mizbeach HaChitzon and the Hecha is af. So too with regard to the Macht of Yom Kippur and the Menorah on a daily basis, we're going to apply the principle of B'samachlo. Now, what's B'samachlo? Here in the case of the Macht of B'samachlo would be on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, according to this logic. Why? Because the Ketores is going to be burnt lifnai v'lifnim the Kodesh Kadoshim, and the Eish that's closest to the Kodesh Kadoshim is the Eish on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, not the Eish on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. The menorah was also located in the Heichal. Take it right next to the Shulchan, next to the menorah from the Mizbeach HaPnimi. Talmud Lomar, therefore we need the pasuk Eish Tamid Tukad Al HaMizbeach Lo Sichbeh, and we're going to darshan it Eish Tamid Jamarti Lecha, the Eish that we are commanded as described as an Eish Tamid, and that's going to be the Eish HaMenorah, because the Torah says in Shvos Chav Zayin La'alos Ner Tamid, so the Ner of the menorah is also called Tamid. Therefore, Lo Tehei Al Barosho Shel Mizbeach HaChitzon. So we're going to look at the Maroch Gedola on the top of the Mizbeach HaChitzon, and we're going to take the Eish from the Mizbeach HaChitzon for the purpose of Adlokas HaMenorah, because the entire parsha is talking about the Mizbeach HaChitzon. So we see that from this pasuk Eish Tamid Tukad Al Mizbeach Lo Sichbeh, we're going to derive the conclusion that Adlokas HaMenorah, they would take the Eish from the Mizbeach HaChitzon. Okay, fine. I understand Lamanu Eish Lemenorah, that from this Gezerah Shav of sorts of Eish Tamid, we're going to derive that the menorah and the Eish from the menorah will be supplied by the Mizbeach HaChitzon, the Maroch Gdol and Mizbeach HaChitzon. But Eish Lamachta, when it comes to Yom Kippurim, Minayin, from whence do we derive that the Eish and the Gecholim for the purpose of the Machta and the Hadlaka, the Haktara of the Ketores Lifnai V'Lifnim should be taken from the Mizbeach HaChitzon? Why don't we say just the opposite, that the Mokum Gecholim should be samuch to the Mokum HaKtara? And if you're going to say that the Gecholim are taken from a place that's close to the actual Haktara, well, that would be the Gecholim from the Mizbeach HaPnimi, not from the Mizbeach HaChitzon. Vidinu. And what's the compelling logic that would lead us to that conclusion? And we should be taking the Gecholim from the Mizbeach HaPnimi. Nemra Eish B'machta. In Perek Tezayin Achrimos, it says, V'lakach Melo HaMachta Gachle Eish. V'nemra Eish B'menorah. Malahalan al Gabi Mizbeach HaChitzon Afkan al Mizbeach HaChitzon. The answer to our problem, because of the compelling logic that the Gecholim should be taken from the Mizbeach HaPnimi for the purpose of the Torah Lifnai V'Lifnim of the Ketores on Yom Kippurim, the answer to that is going to be this Gzeira Shava Eish Eish, that in Machta Yom Kippurim it says Eish V'lakach Molo Machta Gachle Eish. In Menorah it says Eish Lahalos Ner Tamid, and just like the Eish of the Menorah comes from the Mizbeach HaChitzon, and that we derived in Pasuk Vav of Perek Vav, Eish Tamid Tukad Al Mizbeach Lo Sichbeh. Here too, Afkan, with regard to the Eish Machta Yom Kippurim, we're going to take it from the Mizbeach HaChitzon. Again, the Bryce is going to ask, well, wait a minute, there's a compelling logic that would lead us to a different conclusion. O klach l'derech zu. Maybe we should learn these psukim in the following way. Nemra Eish B'Ktores, right? It says Yachtirena with regard to the daily Ketores and yaktirenu means ein aktor below eish. V'nemer eish b'machta, and eish appears in the parsha of Yom Kippur in the machta v'lokach v'lo machta dachle eish. Mala alon, just like the Torah on a daily basis, is b'samach lo. Right, that means the eish has to be close to the Torah, and that's the mizbeach hapnimi where the Torah took place on a daily basis of the Ketores. So the mokum eish, which is samachlo, is the mizbeach hachitzon, is afkan here too with regard to the eish of the machta of Yom Kippur b'samachlo, and that means the mizbeach hapnimi because again, as we said earlier, the Ketores in the machta was. The Torah was in the Kodesh Kadoshim, and the Mizbeach HaPnimi in the Heichal was right there, much closer to the Kodesh Kadoshim than the Mizbeach HaChitzon in the Azara, which was outside of the Heichal. Talmud Lomar, we're going to derive from the Pasuk, V'lokach Maloa Machta Gachle Eish Me'al Mizbeach Milifnei Hashem. Let's underline those two words, Milifnei Hashem, which is going to teach us that the Mizbeach in this Pasuk, and again, we're referring to the machta of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur for the Ketores Liftai V'Lifnim is Lifnei Hashem. Which Mizbeach? The Mizbeach that's Lifnei Hashem. The Lifnei Hashem means that take the Gechalim from the Eish on the Mizbeach, on that side of the Mizbeach, that's Lifnei Hashem. In other words, the Lifnei Hashem is coming to restrict and limit that part of the Mizbeach from which we're going to take the Gechalim. We're not going to take it from just anywhere on the Mizbeach, but rather from that chelik, that part of the mizbech that's lifnei Hashem, and that means the western side of the mizbech, which is right near the heichal. But ezem mizbech shemiktsos lifnei Hashem v'ein kul lifnei Hashem. If the Torah is restricting and specifying that it has to be this part of the mizbech, that part which is lifnei Hashem on the Ma'ariv side, heavy omer, there's only one mizbech that would qualify for that description. That's Mizbeach HaChitzon. The Mizbeach HaPnimi was completely Lifnei Hashem. It was inside the Heichal. It's only the Mizbeach HaChitzon that was in the Azara outside the Heichal, which is not Kula Lifnei Hashem. Only on its western side is it close to the Heichal, and that's called Lifnei Hashem. So we see from this, and we derive from this, that the Gecholim for the Macht of Yom Kippurim should be taken from the Mizbeach HaChitzon. And now the Gemara wants to know, why do we need both Me'al HaMizbeach and Milifnei Hashem? Itzrich lemichtav Me'al HaMizbeach v'itzrich lemichtav Milifnei Hashem. Because Rachmana, had the Torah only written Me'al HaMizbeach and omitted the words Milifnei Hashem, Hava Min, I would have said, my Mizbeach, what Mizbeach are we talking about when it says Me'al HaMizbeach? It's the Mizbeach HaPnimi. And that's the Mizbeach that's Samuch, that's right next to the Kodesh Kadoshim. And that's why the Brisa before wanted to derive the conclusion that from the Eish of the Ketores, which is on a daily basis Samuch, and that's the Mizbeach HaChitzon, that the Eish for the Haktorah of Yom Kippurim L'fnai V'Lifnim should also be Samuch, and therefore it should be from the Mizbeach HaPnimi. It's therefore because of Rachmana Milifnei Hashem, and Milifnei Hashem tells me that we're talking about the Mizbeach HaChitzon and not the Mizbeach HaPnimi. But because of Rachman, if the Torah had only said Milifnei Hashem and not Me'al HaMizbeach, is Hava Min, I would have thought Dafka Milifnei Hashem. It's got to be Mamish Milifnei Hashem. That chelek of the Mizbeach, which is directly connected Pesach HaHeichal. The Mizbeach, after all, was 32 amos wide. Pesach HaHeichal was only 10 amos wide. So we might have thought that it's got to be taken Milifnei Hashem, which means within that 10 amma rochav of the 32 amma rochav of the Mizbeach. And therefore, on the top of Memvav, Avol, Mehai Gisa, from this side of the Pesach Hohel, a little bit beyond the Pesach, or from that side beyond the Pesach, Ema Lo, he hasn't fulfilled his mitzvah's obligation of HaKtorah, because he didn't take it exactly, mamish b'lifnei Hashem, tzricha, therefore, the Torah has to add Me'al HaMizbech as a ribui to teach me that the entire western side of the Mizbeach is kosher for Lekichas HaGecholim, and you don't need exactly the Keneged Pesach HaHeichal. he says, if the coals were taken from this side of the Mizbech or that side, I would say that Akrava is not valid. For although the coals were taken from the western side of the Mizbeach, which is Lifnei Hashem to some degree, but they were not taken from that spot, which is directly opposite the Pesach HaHechel. Therefore, we have to have the Pasuk Me'al Mizbeach to teach us that the Eish could be located anywhere on the Tzad HaMaravi, on the western side of the Mizbeach, even if it's not directly opposite the Pesach HaHechel. This is where we're going to stop for today. Mirza Hashem. Tomorrow we begin on the top of Daf Mem Vav Amud Aleph. Have a great day.